That's okay. Okay, thank you very much. So now I will invite Dr. Eric Chua from Singapore to present on monitoring students' online learning experience under COVID-19 at Singapore University findings.
Thanks. Is the screen showing okay? And is my voice fine?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
So hello, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share. So I will like to share a little bit about our experience at the Singapore University of Technology, monitoring our students' online learning experience under COVID from when COVID started to now. And along the way, I'd love to hear comments or just sharing from other colleagues. And please, after this, please do drop me an email or let's connect on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. So maybe just an overview, what's the COVID situation in Singapore and then in our university, the Singapore Institute of Technology. So far in Singapore, in terms of cases, this is the situation. So from the beginning to now, we had a big first wave, a lot among the so-called worker dormitories. And then it's been relatively quiet for a while. And then recently, it's sort of started picking up. Then on the vaccination front, we started vaccination late last year. As of now, we're about 81% fully vaccinated. So that is sort of the overall sort of feel of what COVID is in Singapore. So with that in context, if I superimpose that overall case load, so as a university, this is what we've been doing. So when COVID first hit, it was our second term in academic year 19. Initially, we went with this rule, which is large classes go online. So large classes meaning classes more than 50 students all go online. But then very soon with this uptick, that was, in fact, just before that, even before that, that was where a circuit breaker was announced. So essentially, it's equivalent of lockdowns, I think, in many countries. So with that, first, all the exams went online. And then subsequently, it's 100% online learning for one whole term, trimester 3. And then as a country, because we were sort of somewhere in this phase, so we started opening up into what we call phase 1 to phase 2. And so as a university, we also started going back to the rule whereby for large classes, we go online. So throughout this entire period, we were doing this. So classes below 50, face-to-face, classes above 50, online. So by and large, it's, as you may expect, the lectures that were online, online either as pre-recorded lectures or as live lectures. And then a lot of the smaller so-called tutorial practicals were then still be able to be conducted face-to-face. But then with this uptick that you see here, that's where we went so-called back to what we call phase 2 under a heightened alert. So we went back, therefore, to almost fully online, except for practical labs in small groups that were still done face-to-face. And then with sort of, as a country, I guess the posture entering into an endemic posture. So we're coming back again with this trimester that started today, back to this rule, which is large classes go online, small classes go face-to-face. So in a nutshell, this is our journey as a university, pretty much in line with the overall situation in Singapore. So we, in this process, we we also try to track the students' experience and responses. So among the various things that we did, one was we collected some data. So right after the very first trimester, halfway through the trimester, we had to go fully online. At the end of the trimester, we did a student survey, response rate of about 15% of the total student population. And then we also follow up with another one, fairly about a year after that, so about the beginning of this year, with a response of about 10%. We also took the opportunity to survey similar questions with our academic staff. We also look at module feedback. That's part of the regular teaching process. So every term we get module feedback. So look at that for the term trimester 1, so late last year. So I'm going to share some of the results that we found from these 3 pieces of data. And I think a large part of it, it's in line with what Misty just shared in terms of engagement. So the key areas that investigated, we look at preference, to student preference. Do they prefer online? Do they prefer face-to-face for different kinds of classes? Their perceived effectiveness, so they may prefer, but then also we want to check what is their perceived effectiveness. We also try to look at how students are coping, the self-regulation for online learning, as well as to understand the general challenges that students are facing with online learning. So these are areas that we investigated. In terms of results, so just to give a very broad sense, so through the module feedback, so with 2 such questions in the module feedback, online activities were effective, as well as they complemented or blended well with face-to-face. So by and large, we have 3/4 students agreeing to this kind of statement, so giving us a general sense that we are on the right track. Sort of diving into the data a little bit. So this is where we ask them about their preferences, as well as their perceived effectiveness across different class types, so lectures, tutorials, consultations, and so on. So what we found is that in terms of preference, so there's a preference for online, for lectures. And then there's a preference for face-to-face when it comes to tutorials and labs. For the other types, I don't think there's a clear-cut preference. And then for the perceived effectiveness, as you may expect for tutorials and labs, preference for face-to-face as well as perceive that face-to-face is more effective. The interesting thing comes to the lecture that preference is for online. However, I think at least till when the survey was done, students were still perhaps just a tad feeling that that's the case, though face-to-face lectures might still be a bit more effective in their view. So that's the preference and perceived effectiveness. We also asked the same questions to academic staff. And interesting thing is that the preferences are the same. So that's good in terms of alignment. Perceived effectiveness, also the same. And something interesting that we pick up is that academic staff tend to perceive the effectiveness higher than students across the board. So no matter whether it's lectures, tutorials, we always think we're more effective than the students think we are. So something interesting is coming out from there, but perhaps not surprising. So that's the preference and perceived effectiveness. We then also went on to ask a little bit, try to get more in data on the perceived effectiveness, specifically on online learning. And what we found is that generally, students are okay in terms of clarity. So I think that the having to go online and deliver, so the delivery, I think students were relatively happy with it. So the comments, along the lines of material is clear, delivery is fine. But where perhaps we need to work on, as been alluded to, is the engagement bit. So to continue to enhance engagement and participation, because this is where I think the ratings are a bit lower. So the atmosphere, the engagement, so it's active participation, and comments like this that you probably seen earlier from Misty and Mark's presentation. Similar themes. And then on the part that we asked them in terms of how they are managing the online learning. So we try to use simple questions like this that students can understand. So asking them overall, is it a positive experience? Do you feel in control, time management, self-discipline, adaptation, and so on. And what you are looking here is the same set of questions and the responses at the beginning of COVID and about 1 year later. So at the beginning are the blue bars, and about 1 year later are the orange bars. So what we are happy to see is that across the board, there's a general improvement after 1 year of so-called COVID-induced online learning. But if we sort of break it down, I think it seems to be the part about the self-discipline and time management that's probably gotten a little bit better. But of course, overall, in terms of finding it engaging, enjoyable, it's probably something that we have to still work on. So then a little bit about some of the improvements. So I think students are getting, as you may expect, getting to terms, learning how to cope with studying, where online learning has a bigger component. And I think overall we're happy that there is, students are adjusting. In terms of challenges, so this is the part where in the survey is the qualitative part. So we found that there are some themes that came out. So for example, unconducive study environment. So we all recognize not everybody has a conducive environment at home. We hear that people have to leave their house to study. So things like unable to create a productive space, hard to focus at home, definitely very real. And as a university, so far what we have done is we have actually created space within the campus for small group of students to come back for online learning should they wish to. Second theme sort of alluding to what was talked about earlier. So felt that engagement and interaction will be constrained online. So hard to clarify questions effectively. Classes could be more engaging, quite hard for the lecturers to engage everyone. And then, of course, the social part. So as much as we try to put them in groups and so on, but I think there was also this notion that because of the sort of reduced social interactions and all that, so some of them were saying it sort of affects their motivation a little bit, feel a bit isolated. And then, of course, technical difficulties. So as much as a university, we cater for this. We make sure that everyone has internet access and so on. But still, of course, there can be technical difficulties from time to time which affected their studies. So these are the data that we sort of came out from those, results that came out from data that we have. And perhaps just to share some reflections on this data so far, about 2 years into the journey. So we thought that it's important to bear in mind the context that online learning is taking place, and everyone, faculty and students involved are still learning, and that's why we gathered here to learn from one another. So we will continuously trying to make it better, more engaging. And I suppose alluding to what was shared earlier is then to continue to emphasize that student-educator partnership. So it's not just on the students' end to figure out how to do online learning themselves. It's not just on our end to figure out how to engage them. It really takes both hands to clap. So as part of that, perhaps it's also to socialize the expectations, because before this, at least in Singapore, this kind of online learning, it's not that prevalent. So students might not know so-called the rules or the expectations in online classes, online learning. That's one. And also, of course, to continue to support student self-regulation. So, and also, I think part of what we're doing here is to then to hear their voice and to let them know that they are heard. I think that's important as well in terms of our engagement with the students, at least as a university. And of course, importantly, that there's a disadvantaged group, albeit small, but there's always a disadvantaged group within our student population that we have to bear in mind and cater for. And also, I think as is typical, this approach of studying, as we may find, sometimes people who respond are the people who have something to say, and people who have something to say might not might tend to be those that have something negative to say. So I guess we do hear anecdotally that there's positive comments coming from the student body. So I think for us, we are sort of bearing in mind that a balanced approach is important to avoid sort of letting the handful of loud complaints drown the positive comments. And of course, we're continuously improving our teaching. So part of it is now that face-to-face time is much more precious than before. How do we make full use? And of course, that together with the blended of online, how do we then optimize? Also, at the same time, along the lines of the precious face-to-face, so we're still able to do physical labs, but we're also looking at how do we stretch or so-called enhance the physical labs with technology. So for example, with simulation, so it's still physical, but with simulation, we might be able to expand the repertoire or deepen the learning experience that students can get with these so-called precious face-to-face teaching time. And then, of course, for online learning, continuously trying to make them more engaging, increase student participation, and also importantly, to check on their progress, to try to catch them before they fall. And I suppose overall, as a whole, we're trying to do as a university is also to continue to innovate under this blended teaching or blended learning approach, and of course to research the effectiveness and the impact of our new approaches. That brings me to the end of my sharing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Eric Chua, for your excellent presentation. Another wonderful presentation this afternoon. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to learn about what you have done at your university and share some findings about your research.